Hello Angular developers. Today we are exploring different ways to pass parameters to components in Angular 18. This is a fundamental concept that allows components to communicate and share data effectively. So let's dive in. First, we will explore the input properties. The most common way to pass data to child component is through input properties. So in this case, we will have a parent component and a child component. So for the parent component, I would be using the app.component.ts, and for the child component, I would have to create another component. So let's generate it. For that, I will use the Angular CLI command ng generate c child. Press enter. That would generate a new component for us. Okay. Now to make this component available to our app.component, then we have to go to the app.component.ts and let's import our newly generated child component in this way, child component, and make sure to import the child component. If you are using the older version of Angular that is older than 17, then you may have to declare this newly generated component in the module where you want to use this component. Okay, but from Angular 17 and in the standalone components, you can simply import your components to the imports array. Okay, so now open the app.component.html, remove everything. And here I will add my app child component. And here you can add an heading just to make it prominent that this is a parent component. Save it. Okay, you can see we have a parent component and the content from the child component is visible. Now inside the child component, we have to define an input. So go to the child component.ts. We have to add input directive or input decorator and make sure to import it from Angular/core and give it a name, whatever you want to define. I want to give it the name message of type string, and the default value should be empty string. Okay, in the child component, I can simply consume this variable message. Okay, now go back to the parent, and in the app.component.html you can simply pass this variable. So if you are using VS Code and you have proper extensions installed, then if you start typing, it will show you the suggestions with all of the available inputs that you can use. So right now you can see we have only one input that we can use. This is the input that we just defined. Just select it and pass it the data. Data passed to child from parent. Okay, save it. Okay, you can see that this data was passed into the child component, and then child component displayed it in the child component.html. All right. So you can also save this message in a variable in the component class like this. Just wrap it in a square bracket and use the component variable in this way, child message or whatever name you want to use. And here let's define that child message is equal to, and paste the text that you want to use. Okay, now you will notice that it is still working, and if you make any change, it will be reflected immediately. Now let's explore the second method, that is route parameters. So for passing data between components that are not directly related, you can use the route params or route parameters. So if your Angular 18 app already has the routes file, you can directly use it. If not, you can create your own file by any name, app.routes, or you can give it any other name. It's totally up to you, and you have to export it in this way. So this is just a simple plain array, and it has been given the types routes. And now if you go to the app.config.ts, you just have to provide the router in this way, and you have to pass the routes array that you created in this file. Okay, so you will do this only if you did not generate the routing when you generated your project, or if routing is not included yet in your project. Okay, otherwise by default when you generate a new project, it may ask you a question that if you want to use routing. If you select yes, then it will automatically configure your app and add the basic starter file for the routes. Okay, so now in this array I will add a path, a route with the property path, and here you can add user slash id. So this slash id colon id is, this is basically the route parameter that we are defining here, and here you can use a component, user component. We did not generate the user component yet, so you can generate it. So let me generate a new component quickly, and you generate c user. Okay, so once the component is generated, you can simply import it like this, and once it is imported, it's ready to be used. But we have to update our user component so that we could retrieve the user ID from the URL. So go to the user component.ts, and here I will define my default user ID that would be of type string, and its default value would be empty string. I also need a service, so I have to inject that. You can use the constructor to inject the service, or you can simply define a private property route and give it the response of the inject function. Make sure to import the inject function from Angular/core and pass it the activated route in this way. All right, now we can use the ng on init, but for that we have to add the implement statement here, because now we want to implement the on init function. Okay, ng on init function is added. Now we have to access the params that we have added in the URL. For that, use this .route.params, and within params we have the subscribe function. Just call that, and that subscribe function expects a callback function. So let's pass it, and that callback function would be receiving a parameter. So I can give it any name. I will give it the name params, and let's add our logic in this callback function. I can just use this user ID is equal to params ID. Okay, so within this square bracket, you have to specify the exactly same name of the parameter that you have defined in this route. So in this route, you notice that we have added the name ID. So that's why you must have to use the same spellings here as well. But in case if you have a different name here for the parameter like XYZ, then you have to specify it here as well in the same way. Okay, let me revert it. All right, now it's time to test it. So I will go to the user component, and here I will add user ID, save it. Now let's try to access it, but remember, it will not work yet, because as we are trying to access the component through the routing, so in the main entry level component, that is the app.component.html, we must have to add the router outlet. Okay, because this is a placeholder within all of our components from the routing would be loaded. Okay, so now if you add user/1, you would notice that now the data from the user component is visible, and also the user ID that we added in the URL is available and visible on the screen. So if you change the ID, you will notice that the ID is updated here as well. Now let's move on to the next method, that is the query parameters. Query parameters are useful for optional parameters. Okay, so for that, I will create two different components. One would be the sender component, and second one would be the receiver component. So let's do that. ng generate c sender, ng generate, let's add the and operator, ng generate c receiver. Okay, so this will generate two components that we need. Okay, now in order to use both of these components, we have to add them in the imports array of the app.component.ts. So for that, add the sender component here and receiver component. Now go to the app.component.html, and let's include both of these components, sender component, and we need to add the receiver component in this way. Okay, these can be in a different route as well. It's totally up to you. Okay, you can see we have sender component data and receiver component data visible. Let me remove everything from the URL. Okay, now let's go to the sender component, and in the sender component.html, I will add a button, send query params, and we will register a click event on this button, and we will call navigate function whenever somebody clicks on this button. So copy the name of the function and go to the sender.component.ts and define this function. And now we also need to inject a service in this component, and the service would be the router service. For that, let's define the private property router. You can make it public property as well if you want to use in the HTML, but as we don't want to use it outside of this class, so we are just marking it the private. So router is equal to inject and pass it the router service that we want to inject. Make sure to add the import statement for this router class, and now we can simply use this .router.navigate and give it an array and give it the path where you want to redirect. You can redirect it to the same route where we are already, or you can use a different path if you want. So it's totally up to you. Now we need to pass a second parameter that will have an object, and that object will expect query params, and query params will further expect an object, and within that object you can pass all of your data properties that you want to pass. For example, I want to pass a message, hello from sender. Save it. Okay, so let me add a heading here that will clearly reflect that this is a sender component. Sender component, save it. Okay, now if you click on this button, you would notice that a query string parameter has been attached with the current path of your Angular application along with all of the data that we have passed in the object here. Now we have to update our receiving component in a way that it could capture the data from the URL and immediately show it on the screen. So go to the receiver component in that case, and here we need to inject a service. Private route is equal to inject activated route. Make sure to import inject and activated route from the relevant paths, and we have to implement the ng on init. So add the implement statement here on init class here. Make sure to import the on init class as well from angular/core, and now add ng on init function here, and here I will use this .route dot. Here we have the query params property that can be subscribed to, so just call the subscribe function on it. And so this is, if you hover on it, you will notice that the return type of this property is observable, so that's why we are able to subscribe to it. Now just pass the callback function, and that callback function would be receiving a parameter with the name, anything you define. I will name it params, and let's write the logic. So I will define a property message is equal to default empty string, and here I will use this dot message is equal to params message. Okay, and in case if no message was provided, you can add a default message as well, no message passed. Save it. Now go to the receiver.component.html. Let's define a heading tag. Within that I will specify this is a receiver component, and here we will display the message that would be received from the URL. Okay, now you can see we passed the hello from the sender from the URL, and that text is visible here. But in case if you don't pass anything from the URL, you will see a default message saying that no message passed. If you click on that again, the query string parameter has been added, and you have received it in the receiver component, and we have displayed it because of the subscribe function. So you know the subscribe function would watch the query parameters all the time, and whenever any change was detected in the query string parameters, it will immediately capture the information, and we will be able to use them in this logic area. Now let's move on to the fourth method, that is the services. For sharing data between unrelated components, you can use a shared service. So let's quickly generate a shared service by running the Angular CLI command with the name data, and with that you would notice that data service has been generated. Now within that service on the top, I will define a private property message source. Okay, and here I will instantiate a class, RxJS class with the name behavior subject. New behavior subject, make sure to import it from the RxJS, and the generic type would be string, and pass it the default value. Okay, now we have to define a function. Actually, before that I have to create another property, current message, and is equal to this dot message source as observable. Okay, we have converted it into the observable. So this is the private and this is the public property. We cannot access this one, but we will be accessing this one. Okay, now create a function change message, and we will be receiving a message of type string. And now we will call a function next on the message source. So let's type message source dot next, and we will pass the message string that we received from the parameter. Save it, and now let's go to the sender component, and here I will add another button and send through service would be the text, and here I will register my click event that would call a function send service message. Okay, call that function, and now we will define this function in the .ts file. Okay, let's write the logic here, but before that I need to inject my service. Private data service is equal to inject data service. Make sure to import the data service from its file path, and now within this function I will access that service, data service, and there we have a function called change message, and we can pass any text to it. Hello from sender through service. Okay, and now let's move on to the receiver component. Go to the ts file, and here I will, in the engine init, I will use this. Actually, before that I need to inject the service. Private data service is equal to inject data service. Make sure to import the data service from its related file, and now let's access that service. And within that service, this time we want to access current message instead of the function earlier that we accessed earlier, and let's subscribe to it, and we will pass it a callback function. That callback function would be expecting or receiving a parameter. So let's define that, give it any name. I will give it a relevant name message because we are going to receive a message. Now you can just assign that message to the component property with the name message, and that's it. Save it. Okay, now if you don't pass any query string parameter, this default message is basically coming from the data service. So this is a default message that we have added, and as this default message was added, so at the first time when the component is loaded, this function would be immediately executed, and we will be getting the default message that will be saved in the component property message. Okay, but as soon as you click on this button, send through service, it should pass a new data to the service, and then service observable will send signal to all of the subscriptions where we have subscribed to this. Okay, so as we have subscribed here, we will be get the signal here, and we will get the latest data that was triggered. So let's try that. If you clicked on that, you can see that immediately the data was traveled to the receiver component, and we immediately displayed that with the help of the message property in the HTML. Okay, and there you have it. We have explored 4 different ways to pass parameters to components in Angular, and those methods were input properties, route parameters, query parameters, and services. Each method has its use cases, and choosing the right one depends on your specific scenario and component relationships. Remember, effective component communication is the key to building robust and maintainable Angular applications. I hope that you found some value in this tutorial. If you think so, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified for my upcoming videos. If you have any questions or concerns or suggestions, then please leave them in the comment section below. I would do my best to reply them as soon as possible. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Goodbye.